after we understand what someone's why is, the next thing that we've got to establish is what are the principles and values of the organization, and what's the principles and values of each person that I'm trying to lead on this team. Stephen R Covey said, there are three constants in life: change, choice, and principles. Great leaders have to be able to connect, motivate, and get buy-in from their team members. And for you to do that effectively, you've got to know what's important to each team member. All right, welcome to another episode of Increase. I'm Blake Anderson. Pleasure to be with you. If you've been joining us, we've dived into organizational leadership. Go back and listen to the last two episodes to get caught up. So this is a 7-step framework, and each step leads to the next. All the steps are powerful, but they build upon each other. And so for you to get the most out of what you learned today, you're going to need to apply it in the context of what we talked about last week. So go back, watch the last two episodes so that you can be caught up to organizational leadership framework. So this week, it's the second step. All steps are peace. They start with peace. Last week we talked about prosper. Really, we're talking about goals and motivations. If I'm going to be an organizational leader, then I've got to know what my organization is trying to accomplish. I've got to know what my team might be trying to accomplish inside of that master goal. And then I've got to be aware of what all the people on my team are trying to accomplish in their lives. What's their personal why? How can I get them to plug that why, that motivation, into this organization so I can create alignment that leads to greater cooperation? So after we understand what someone's why is, the next thing that we've got to establish is what are the principles and values of the organization, and what's the principles and values of each person that I'm trying to lead on this team. Stephen R Covey said, there are three constants in life: change, choice, and principles. Great leaders have to be able to connect, motivate, and get buy-in from their team members. And for you to do that effectively, you've got to know what's important to each team member. What's the goal they're after, but what are the principles and values that are important to them? You see, you might be offering someone $1 million contract, but there's a lot of things that I won't do for $1 million. You see, some of my core values is honesty, integrity, doing things with my family. And so if you offer me $1 million contract, but it jeopardizes my relationship with my family, it asks me or requires of me to do something that is outside of my character, outside of my principles and values, I'm going to say no, and you're not going to get me motivated to help you with that. Well, that's a pretty extreme case, but leaders have to be able to communicate the principles and values of the organization, the team, but also be able to connect and help their team members connect with the values of that team. And so you've got to know what those values are. So when we think about principles and values, let's just establish a couple things so that we're moving together throughout this concept. So we talk about principles, or really talking about how things are done, okay? We can define them as rules, beliefs, ideas that guide you, okay? Those are your principles, the ideas that guide you. How you do things. It's not what you do or why you do it, but how you do it. So one of the core principles of our real estate organization is transparency. So transparency isn't my goal. Transparency isn't what I do, but everything that we do in our organization is transparent. We don't hide anything from our team members. We don't hide anything from our customers and clients. We're transparent. So it's how we do things. Values are very similar to principles, but they're a little different. Values is what is important. So if we put a definition, one's judgment of what is important in life. So something I value is quality time with my family. So it's not necessarily my principle, but it's my value. And so the things that I value quality time with my family, there's lots that I do outside of my family, but all the things that I'm doing is because I'm trying to gain back time with my family. So alignment, to get me in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish, it it's not that I won't put in extra time or won't put in extra hours, but I'm not going to jeopardize my relationship with my family, if that makes sense. Okay. So to be an effective leader, you got to know what your company stands for. Okay. You got to know what are the principles and values of this organization. What do they expect of me? How do they want me to answer this email? How do they want me to make this phone call? What type of language do I use in this sales presentation or in my marketing copy? All of this should be an extension of and in alignment with the organization's principles and values. Many of you lead a team inside of a larger organization, and each team has its own culture, principles, and values. But for the greatest level of alignment and the greatest level of cooperation, then our team's culture has got to be a fit with the principles and values of the organization's culture. But then each person, for them to commit wholeheartedly with their intentions, their essence, their time, they've got to see that the team that they're contributing to is in alignment with what's important to them. That the way they get to do their work is accepted by the organization and furthers that organization's goals. Now, you as a leader, you could send out a questionnaire to everybody on your team. Say, tell me your principles and values. Many of you probably won't, but what you can be doing is always listening for what's important to somebody. Most of the time, actions speak louder than words. And if you've had a relationship with someone for very long, you normally can get a sense of what's important to them. And so if you're going to lead them well, if you're going to get them to participate fully in what you're up to and the organizational goal, you're going to have to get in alignment with their principles and values and help them see the alignment, right? Now, I say that because we're talking about leadership, and it's not just the awareness of my company, but it's how do I lead people effectively. Now, when you lead people effectively, you've got to understand that there's a difference between ideal and actual. Many people will say that my principles and values are one thing, but their actual principles and values will be evident by their actions. Okay, so I had a contractor a few years ago, and he would tell you that his principles and values were quality work. It was in the construction field. And that sounded good, but I know that wasn't really his actual principles and values because it was not uncommon for him to cut a corner to get a job on time. It wasn't uncommon for him to do a lower quality work because he didn't feel like he was getting paid enough. And so no matter what he told me about quality being important to him, I knew that what really was important to him was that he felt like he was getting paid fairly for what he did. And he normally wasn't going to give me any more time or attention past what he thought he was getting compensated for. Now, as a leader, in order to lead people, I'm watching those things. And as I begin to understand someone's principles and values, I can normally get them to find alignment with what I'm trying to accomplish. So this same contractor, before things fell apart for quality reasons, we often would have some sticking points in negotiations on projects, and it seemed like the prices that he was asking for weren't commensurate with things that he had done in the past. And we realized at one point that the most important thing for him was being able to make payroll at the end of the week. He cared about taking care of his employees more than he cared about making his mortgage payment, more than he cared about being profitable, more than he cared about quality of work. To him, the most important thing to him was his employees, and he needed to be able to make that payroll. Once we learned that about him, everything changed because his mind couldn't rest until he was confident that he could make payroll by the end of the week. So anytime that we were negotiating prices or getting him involved in the project, I realized, and my site superintendent realized, we had to always present our project, our prices through the lens of, and you'll be able to make payroll on Friday. As long as it ended in, and you'll be able to make payroll on Friday, he relaxed, and we normally could get along and find alignment there. So you're going to have people who are going to say, quality is my principle, or integrity, or transparency. But discerning leaders listen well. You give your people the benefit of the doubt, but you have to pay attention, because your team members are going to reveal what's important to them through a working relationship over time. And someone might say that transparency is important, but what's really going to motivate them is the things that they believe inside, not necessarily the things that they've said publicly. So remember, the goal is organizational alignment that leads to cooperation, right? That's your goal as a leader. You're trying to accomplish an organizational goal, and it's going to be done when you create alignment that leads to cooperation. So hopefully now you're seeing why knowing what's important to your team members, what their personal goals are, what their personal why is, along with understanding what's important to them, their principles and values, is critical for you to be able to get them to buy into your project, to give you all that they have, so that you might accomplish something so much greater. So I want to give you 3 things that you need to be able to do to be a successful leader, okay? For you to be successful, 1, you've got to be personally aligned with the organization. That is so important. You're going to have times where you don't feel aligned with your boss. You may not feel aligned with the project, and maybe some slight misalignment you can push through. But for you to have long-term success, you're going to have to find alignment with the organization. And if that means taking your boss out to lunch, if that means talking through where you don't feel like there's alignment, you've got to have it. Because for you to lead from a place of confidence and really push, you're going to have to feel alignment with what's important to you, with what's important to your company. So that's number 1. You've got to be personally aligned. Second thing is you got to create alignment with your team. And we've been talking about that, right? As I said last week, the Bible says, how can 2 walk together unless they be agreed? Right? If one person is rowing this way and one person is rowing that way, you're going to end up in 2 different directions. So you've got to create that alignment with your team. The third thing is you've got to know the actual principles and values of each team member to ensure their cooperation. So, how can you become an effective organizational leader? How can you use these concepts of prosper and principles to lead your team? Well, I think the thing that you should set aside some time to do is really take time to create that alignment inside of yourself and understand that throughout the chain of command. And so organizational leaders must know the motivations, the principles, and the values, not just of the organization, not just of the people that they're responsible for, but they also need to understand the motivations and values of the leaders up the chain of command. For you to effectively lead inside of your organization, you're going to be really clear what the principles and values of your boss, of their boss, of the organization, and of the people below you, because we're trying to create this perfect alignment where cooperation can lead to greater results. Next week, we're going to add another step to it. We're going to add product or position and responsibility. It's really about bringing clarity. Most people, when they think about leadership and org charts, they start to get into positions. But as you're building a team, you really can't go any further until you've put your goal first and we know what we're building towards. You set the how in place. What are the principles that we're going to act upon? How are we going to do things? And then we can finally start talking about what are we going to do and who's responsible for what. So I hope you join me next week for another episode of Increase as we dig further in to the organizational leadership framework.